a barn, chicken coop, and an equipment shed. The home and outbuildings are located...
Hold on real quick. Can we get it up on our screen too? Sorry, we're just trying to get it pulled up on our screens in here. There we go. Can you see that as well, Ms. Snyder?
I cannot.
Sit tight, Ms. Snyder. I believe we're working on that.
I can see it now.
Oh, you can. Wonderful. Okay, then please proceed with your description, including buildings, structures, drainage, tile, ground facilities.
This is, like I said, this is a family farm that includes a 3-bedroom home, several outbuildings, a barn, chicken coop, and an equipment shed. The home and outbuildings are located just to the east of the proposed pipeline route.
Okay.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Is there any drainage tile, underground installations, water lines, natural gas lines, transmission, telecommunication facilities, etc.?
Sure. There is a well, power lines, sewer and water lines, propane gas lines, and satellite television cable that run throughout the property. There are no drainage tiles on the property and no terraces.
Okay. And can you give us a general idea of where the other infrastructure that's already installed on the property?
Primarily around the homestead.
Obviously, can you describe the timber or forested area?
I'm sorry?
Can you describe the timber or forested area?
There is several groves of trees on the property, as well as a spring-fed stream.
Okay, and the stream is, I assume, within, underneath the trees, kind of runs from southwest to northeast?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Waterways?
Like I said, that's a spring-fed stream that runs through the entire property.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other easements held by third parties?
To my knowledge, there are no other easements on the property that are held by a third party.
Okay. And are there any other features or conditions that might not be readily apparent and that might affect or be affected by the proposed project?
There is also virgin prairie on the property that has never been used for anything other than grazing livestock. This virgin prairie has never been touched and should never be touched by a plow or a shovel.
And where is that on the property?
That would be over by the homestead.
Okay, along the east boundary of the shaded red area.
I'm sorry?
I said, is it the prairie? Is that along the east edge of the red shaded area? Okay, thank you. Thank you. Do you recommend an alternative route for the proposed line? And if so, can you describe that route and the advantages or disadvantages?
Could you repeat the question?
Do you have a proposed alternate route within your property?
If the pipeline would just move a little bit to the west, it would be in a more direct line to the rest of the pipeline going south.
Okay. Are there questions from the parties? Mr. Taylor. Hold on. There you go. Ms. Snyder, this is Wally Taylor with the Sierra Club. Can you hear me okay?
Barely.
This is Wally Taylor with the Sierra Club, and I have a few questions for you.
Okay.
So you're in O'Brien County, correct?
I'm sorry, you're very garbled.
Now you're in O'Brien County, correct?
Plymouth County.
Okay. And your parcel there is 40 acres?
It's 40 tillable acres, 7 acres of pasture. It's a total of approximately 60 acres.
Okay. And if we can go back up to the map and put that on so you can take a look at it. Where is the pasture area?
The pasture area is all around the homestead. There are wetlands on the property as well. It hasn't been designated as a wetland, but the ground is saturated for a good part of the year.
And then where are the tillable acres?
The tillable acres are both on the north side of the spring-fed stream and the south side.
Okay, so basically the west side of the parcel.
I'm sorry?
So the tillable acres would be on the west side of the parcel?
Correct. Both north of the stream and south of the stream.
Right. I think you said you had some part of the land in a USDA program. Which part of the property is that?
It's all of the tillable acres.
And which program is that?
My father was actually unsure of the name of the program.
Okay. Are you the actual owner of the property, or is another family member the actual owner?
My mother and father own the property, and I'm the heir.
The stream and the forested area that runs sort of diagonally through the property, about, is that you said it's a natural spring-fed stream?
It is a spring-fed stream, yes. And there are several wildlife that occupy that area.
Okay. Up in the northeast corner of the parcel, looks like there's quite a bit of wooded area. Is that correct? In the northwest corner?
It's hard for me to see the map.
Is that all wooded up in that area?
It is, yes. And that's where the home is.
There's going out to the east from that wooded area in the northwest corner of the lot. There's a white line. What is that? No, not that. On the right-hand side of the picture. Yeah.
It's actually the lane down to my parents' home that is located in that wooded area.
Your Honor, I don't have an objection, but just to clarify for the record, I wonder if Mr. Taylor would let me make a friendly amendment to his question. I believe that's the east corner, and I believe you referred to it as the northwest.
I think you're right. We agree again.
It's a first time for everything. Thank you, Jay. Thanks, gentlemen. Lawyers tend to be directionally challenged.
The park actually sits in that wooded area, the home does, which is 1,500 feet from where the pipeline is proposed.
And within that wooded area, there's a small white rectangle. What is that?
That's the home.
Is that where your parents live?
That is correct.
Okay. And about how far is that from the pipeline route?
That is approximately 1,500 feet. And there's actually a little bit of a gully between where the pipeline route would be and my parents' home. And so if there would be a rupture or a leak of the pipeline, gas would settle down in that valley and completely engulf my family's home.
Then, on the southwest corner of your property, just across to the west of that, appears to be a number of buildings. What are those buildings?
That is another homestead. That's their neighbor.
And about how far are those buildings from the pipeline route, if you know?
I do not know that.
Do you know how Summit proposes to cross that stream and the woods adjacent to the stream?
It's my understanding they intend to bore underneath the stream.
And do you know whether or not that would entail taking out any of the trees?
Yes.
Do you know whether that would entail taking out any of the trees?
It would. Yes.
Is that a concern that you have?
Yes.
Have you talked to any Summit representatives about your concerns regarding them crossing the stream and taking out some trees?
Yes.
And what was their response?
It's been a while since my parents have been in contact with the land agent. So their initial conversation was very brief and not into much detail.
I think you said in response to a question from the board chair that you might recommend moving the pipeline route to the west. Is that correct?
That's correct.
But wouldn't that impact those buildings just west of your property?
I couldn't take that.
Or how far west would you propose that they move it?
100 miles.
Do you have concerns about whether the pipeline would impact the fertility of your tillable area and the quality of the crops that you harvest?
Absolutely. And the value of the land.
Yeah. How do you think that would impact the crops?
I don't know as if they were even recovered in my mom and dad's lifetime. Production would be greatly reduced.
What kind of experience did you have with the summit representatives when you were talking with them about various aspects of the project and signing an easement?
But like I said, the land agent would show up usually about once a week and would bring me either donuts or Danish to my mom and dad. And then once my mom and dad retained an attorney, they did not hear another word. So,
And why did you not sign an easement?
because my mom and dad have worked very hard for this ground, and they did not want to give up any portion of it for any reason for an unlimited amount of time.
That's all the questions I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor. Ms. Gruenhagen?
Ms. Snyder, can you hear me?
Yes, you are a little level.
Okay, I will try to talk slower. Does that help?
Yes.
Okay. My name is Chris Gruenhagen, and I'm an attorney representing the Iowa Farm Bureau Federation in these proceedings. And I just have a few questions for you because I think much of what I had questions about have already been answered. So I'll just ask about a couple of things here. Did you file any objections or comments in the docket? And how many comments did you file?
I felt one objection.
Okay, so that would have been back in October of 2021?
Correct.
Okay. And one of the things that you expressed a concern about in that comment letter was the effect on topsoil.
Correct.
Do you want to describe your concern with the topsoil?
Well, topsoil is very important to a farming operation. And during the initial discussions, they mentioned that they would be removing the topsoil and then replacing it. And I don't think that we are really very comfortable with that. And don't think that the ground would recover for many, many years after that kind of damage.
So is the damage that you're talking about is just the digging of the trench?
It was our impression that they would remove like the whole first layer of ground through the whole easement.
And so you are concerned about them removing the topsoil over the entire 75-foot construction easement? Okay. Did Summit explain to you that they would be segregating the topsoil so that it got back on top when they put it back together?
Yes.
Okay. about how deep do you think the topsoil is on your property?
I don't know that.
You don't know, okay. And you also mentioned when Chair Helen was asking you questions that you thought there was a wetland on the property,
Yes.
and that's in the area up by the homestead, you said?
It actually runs the whole, pretty much route of the spring fed stream.
Okay, so it would be adjacent to the area that shows up in the area photo with the trees?
Mm-hmm.
So coincide with that?
Yes.
Okay. Have you ever, or have your parents ever filled out a AD 1026 form?
No.
Okay. So NRCS has not evaluated that property?
No.
But if I understand your testimony, you believe that if it was evaluated, it would meet the definition of a wetland?
Portions of it, yes.
And do you farm some of that tillable?
Yes.
Okay. So some of it may be a farmed wetland?
Yes.
Are you familiar with what's required with regard to wetlands to maintain federal farm program eligibility?
No.
Okay. So if that wetland was impacted, that NRCS may evaluate your farm program eligibility?
Could you repeat the question?
If there was additional drainage or something happened to that wetland, do you think that USDA would reevaluate the farm program eligibility for that property?
I do not know that.
Okay. And do you understand what Summit is requesting with the filing of their Exhibit H in this matter?
Generally, yes.
Yes, generally. And what is your understanding of what Summit is requesting with the Exhibit H?
They are requesting that my family's farm be included in the route of the pipeline. And if my parents did not agree to the easement, they would proceed with eminent domain and condemnation.
So if the board decided to grant the pipeline permit, would you like to have the option of still negotiating a voluntary easement prior to, prior to going to eminent domain?
I don't think we would have a choice.
Would you like to be offered that opportunity to consider it, or would you'd rather not talk to them?
I'm sure that my parents would like the opportunity.
Okay. And as a part of that Exhibit H, have you reviewed the easement language?
You restate the question?
Sorry, I had a frog in my throat. As a part of that Exhibit H, did you see there was some requested easement language that Summit has requested?
I did not.
Okay. So as a part, I'll just explain very briefly. So as a part of their eminent domain request, they're also including some language that they would like to see to describe the easement they're requesting. That's in the Exhibit H. And so in that Exhibit H, you can have some input as to what you would like to see the board include or limit that easement to. And so I'm going to ask you a few questions about that. Is that all right with you? Okay. So would you like to see that easement, if if the pipeline permit were granted, would you like to see that easement language limited to just the area where the pipeline is indicated it's going to be placed?
Yes.
If Summit wanted to move it to a different place, later on, say they wanted to reroute the pipeline, would you like them to have to get a new easement?
And we permit.
As far as part of the easement talks about access and Summit's ability to access your property, would you like to see that access limited to the easement area, or are you comfortable with them just being able to access it in the most direct manner possible?
I'm sure that my parents would want it limited to the easement area and limited to certain times of the year.
If you see some crop yield reductions, you mentioned some of that ground is tillable. If you have crop yield reductions that continue to occur past 4 or 5 years, would you want to continue to be compensated for any additional crop loss reductions that continue to occur?
Crop loss and loss of height on the ground.
Are you aware of what size pipe Summit is planning to place on the property?
No.
Would you, in the easement, would you want the board to limit Summit to only using the diameter of pipe they're planning? Or would you like to allow them to, at a later date, replace it with a larger pipe?
I'll limit the size.
Okay. If Summit would like to change the grade of the property, would you like the board to require some consultation with you about changing the grade of the property as a part of their construction? Okay. That's all the questions I have. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Williams, is that right?
That is correct.
Thank you.
Ms. Snyder, my name is Christian Williams. I represent several landowners in this case. I just have some additional questions for you. You had mentioned that Summit initially came out and the initial conversation was very brief, and there was some additional meetings that took place where they brought pastries, but this pretty much abruptly changed once you retained legal counsel. Did I summarize that correctly?
Yes.
Okay. At any point in those meetings, was a proposed easement agreement proposed to you or your parents by Summit?
I think there were several that proposed.
Have you had a chance to read through those agreements?
What's that?
Have you had a chance to read through those agreements?
The initial ones, yeah,
How about your parents? Do you know if they read through them?
they did.
Okay. And did they have any discussions with you about what concerns they had about the language in the easement agreement?
They were concerned with all of them.
Okay. So, for example, did they express awareness that in this particular county, you're probably facing somewhere around a 12-inch in diameter pipe that would be routed through this property? Were they aware that the easement agreement could call up for a potential of 24-inch diameter pipeline?
I don't think that they were aware of it, no.
Okay. And you indicated that the homestead that was shown on the map that we've been looking at here today is within 1,500 feet of the proposed pipeline route.
Yes.
Were you aware that even a pipeline as small as 6 inches in diameter in this particular instance, if ruptured, would encompass the homestead in Plume?
Yes, and actually, the land agent, I think my mom would back that. But if there was a leak or a rupture, the hazardous material would flow like water and would settle in the lower area of the property, which would completely engulf the home.
And so did that.
We would not even have a chance out.
They would not have a chance to get out.
Correct.
And so you had indicated also that, well, let's just talk about this for a second, stay with where we're at. At the 24-inch diameter rate, should the pipeline company decide that that's the appropriate amount of diameter, do you think that that would exacerbate the problem of trying to escape? And would that did that raise concerns with you that the plume or the leakage or rupture gases would exist in your parents' property for an even longer duration of time, given the size of the pipeline rupture?
Absolutely. And then what kind of impact would that have on the ground where the rupture or the leak occurs? There's no studies on how that would impact production in the years after a rupture.
Very good. And without pulling up the map, you had indicated that there was a neighbor in the that is directly west in the southwest corner of the shaded red area defining your parents' property. And that particular neighbor doesn't have the pipeline running through it, correct?
Correct.
And the summit has, the board here has previously indicated that those individuals were not testifying in this particular proceeding. Do you think, given the fact that there is a risk of rupture in any pipeline, including this one, that they should have a say as to whether a pipeline should be running as close to their property as it is presently?
Yes.
All right. In the event of a rupture, for example, you had indicated in your, I believe, written testimony that the hazmat team is several hours away in central Iowa. Where specifically were you referring to when you said central Iowa?
When we initially went to informational meetings, that was what they stated, was that the hazmat team would be located in central Iowa. They did not say specifically where.
Let's focus more locally then. What is the nearest town to your parents' property?
It's in Iowa.
And how big is that town?
I do not know.
And would you say it's less than 2,000 or greater than 2,000?
I would say probably around 2,000.
Around 2,000. The fire department service or emergency services that are available in that town, are they a professionally hired organization or are they a group of volunteers?
As far as I know, it's all volunteer.
Do you have any indication, based on your personal knowledge or information that's been conveyed to you to formulate part of your personal knowledge, that whether or not the nearest emergency responders are anticipating or preparing for the construction of a pipeline near your parents' property?
I would not know.
Has anybody indicated to you that any emergency services are closer than a few hours away that would be prepared to deal with any kind of pipeline rupture?
No.
Now, your parents, you indicated at the opening part of this discussion that your parents had significant concerns, and I'd like to jump through a couple that have been discussed here today and just confirm whether they form a part of your parents or your personal concern. Aside from the rupture risk that we've talked about, have you or your parents discussed the concerns in the easement agreement about whether or not, as part of this eminent domain proceeding, your parents might be required to live with a CO2 pipeline in the event of an abandonment by Summit?
Can you restate the question?
Certainly wasn't a great question. You know, there exists the possibility, as your understanding, that Summit might abandon in place the pipeline. Is that correct?
Yes.
The easement gives them that option.
Yes.
But did your parents' evidence indicate concern about the fact that a pipeline would be left in place on their property for them to deal with in the future?
Left in place and or sold to somebody else for another use?
Mm-hmm. And you're referring to Summit transferring ownership of that particular pipeline, portion of the pipeline route or the pipeline in its entirety to a third party?
Correct.
Right. And Summit hasn't indicated to you whether they intend to keep ownership of it or not, correct?
Correct.
Do you have any personal knowledge about what pipeline companies typically do once the pipeline's constructed in terms of transfer of ownership?
I do not.
Have your parents expressed concern about the pipeline being present and affecting any kind of crop production, either on the route or nearby the route?
Crop reduction, soil compaction, they will not have access to a portion of the tillable ground once construction begins.
And do they operate any heavy equipment on their land?
We have someone that comes in and does the planting, the spraying, and the harvesting with equipment, yes.
Do you know how heavy that person's largest piece of equipment is?
I do not know.
All right. Has your parents indicated concern about the possible risk that in construction of a pipeline, a cavity might be produced,
Yes.
which would run the risk that the equipment that's run over it would sink
Yes,
and possibly come into contact with the pipeline
yes.
and possibly put either that person who's farming or your parents at legal liability for damages to the pipeline should it sink far enough?
Absolutely. Yes.
With fertility with compaction, does that tend to affect fertility of the land? It's, for example, the microorganism environment that's currently in place on the property, the crop production, things of that nature.
That is my understanding, yes.
And what is your understanding of how compaction or presence of a pipeline might affect that?
It's my understanding that compaction impacts how, because my family uses no-till, so how any leftover residue for previous crop would be decomposed.
Okay. And when it comes to disturbing the ground, do you have an understanding of how you're supposed to approach the pipeline company with any damages that might be incurred as they can proceed to if they were to proceed to construct the pipeline on your parents' property?
I do not have any knowledge.
Has someone ever explained that to you?
No.
In terms of land value reduction, do you feel that the pipeline being placed on your parents' property would interfere with their long-term objective of using this property for their long-term care needs?
Absolutely.
Do you think it would? Sorry, go ahead.
I feel that they've already seen a 30% reduction in the value just because they have been named as a potential route for the pipeline.
Do your parents plan to sell this property within the next few years?
No.
How long a timeline do you think we're looking at here for eventual sale of the land, if that is in the agenda?
That depends on their health. They would like to stay there for their entire lives.
Do they plan to just continue do they rent it out? Is that what they do?
He custom farms it.
Okay, is someone just helping, or is that according to a written lease?
Pays somebody to come in and plant for him.
I see. So they maintain full operational control. They just supervise it at this point, given their age. Understood. Do you think has the person that has been assisting up to this point in farming evidenced any concerns about farming over a pipeline?
Yes.
And what is that concern been?
I actually believe that their farm is also in the route and have not agreed to an easement either.
Well, what's that person's name?
I do not feel at liberty to disclose that.
Okay. Fair enough. Do you know if that individual plans on testifying here at a later date?
I do not know.
So with all these considerations in mind, as you sit here talking to the board, do you feel that whatever small amount of monetary remuneration you were to receive, or your parents were to receive under the proposed easement agreements, is adequate for all the risks that we just talked about here over the last 10 minutes?
Absolutely not.
And in fact,
The
sorry,
impact that it has had on them physically and emotionally, you cannot price off.
right. And in addition to the non-monetary effects, but just say, for example, a risk of rupture, would, in your opinion, that would completely wipe out whatever monetary payment may come from these proceedings. Is that fair?
It's fair.
And same for pretty much any other risk that I've discussed with you during your time on this call.
Yes.
During any of the discussions with Summit, did they talk to you about whether or not you or your parents would be involved in discussions about how construction was to take place, either before or during construction?
No.
Are you aware that through the easement agreement, and are your parents aware through the easement agreement that Summit has sole discretion as to where the final pipeline route goes through this property?
I think that my parents were under the impression that once it was finalized, they could not move it, but that's not what I've been hearing during hearing this.
If I told you that upon any approval that this board provides, Summit could still decide to move the pipeline closer to your parents' home, would that surprise you?
Objection, Your Honor.
State your objection.
The question misstates the content of the Exhibit H for this parcel. More specifically, the Exhibit H is required to include a meets and bounds description of the location of the easement, as well as a map depicting it. It does include both those things. Nowhere in that Exhibit H does it indicate that Summit, after this hearing, can choose to put it wherever it would like.
Thank you. Mr. Williams, do you have a response?
I'm sorry?
You have a response?
I'll pass on the question for now. Rephrase. Where was I?
Brian, leave it in the notebook.
I'll find that. Just a couple more questions, Ms. Snyder. As you sit here before this board, do you believe that the pipeline that's proposed here promotes to public convenience?
Absolutely not.
Is it a public necessity in your mind?
Absolutely not. It's purely right now.
And is it your personal opinion that this pipeline serves the needs of a few rather than the needs of Iowans?
Absolutely.
And you're asking that Summit's application be denied?
Absolutely.
All right, thank you. No further questions.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. Ms. Ryan, excuse me.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good afternoon, Ms. Snyder. My name is Anna Ryan, and I represent Carrie Hirth in this proceeding. She's an intervener who, like you, is the daughter of a landowner. I want to follow up on some of the answers that you gave earlier. And one is that, if I understood correctly, you said that it was a Summit representative who told you that the carbon dioxide would settle into low areas?
Yes, it was the land agent.
And based on your understanding of the topography of your land, that low area where it would settle would be your parents' homestead.
Correct.
Did the Summit agent give any indication of what kind of safety advice they would have for your parents in case of a rupture?
My parents had the impression that they would not even have time to get out if there was a rupture. That it would cut them.
Did the Summit representative suggest sheltering in place?
No.
Did they suggest any safety measures?
No.
I want to ask you a few questions about your parents' house. So if you can't answer, just let me know. How many stories is your parents' house?
2,
Which floor of their house do they spend the most time on?
the main floor.
Do you happen to know when your parents most recently had their windows updated?
Within the last 5 years.
Do you know when they've had their doors updated?
No,
Do you know what the insulation level of their house is?
I do not.
Do you know if your parents have ever had a blower door test to determine the air leakage in their house?
No,
Do your parents ever stay at home with the windows open?
all the time.
Do your parents ever spend time outside?
All the time.
What floor of your parents' house do they spend? I think you already answered. The first floor is where they spend most of their time.
Can you repeat the question?
I may be repeating myself inadvertently. Did you already state that your parents spend most of their time on the first floor?
Yes.
Okay. So that concludes my questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Don't see any other questions. Do the board members have questions? Board Member Burns?
I have been asking questions on the negotiation process, but Mr. Taylor, you seem to have taken that over for me, so thank you for that, and I do not have any questions.
Okay. Thank you. Ms. Snyder, you're excused. Thank you.
Thank you.